The following Conscious Consumer Network recording of a live broadcast is available to purchase in high definition at ethymarket.com. Support free and independent media by becoming a CCN pledger. For €10 a month, you can have unlimited access to CCN high definition downloads at ethymarket.com. Ethymarket, the ethical marketplace for conscious consumers.
This is For the Love of Learning, Voices of the Alternative Education Movement. Be inspired by the voices of visionaries, changemakers, and ordinary, extraordinary people who do what they do, all for the love of learning.
Welcome. I'm Katarina Bozer. In this presentation, we're going to be looking at ways to accelerate achievement for twice exceptional learners. All teachers share a common goal: to educate their students, nurturing and leading them to success. Just as teachers are all individuals, so too are their students. Finding the right tools to achieve success in each individual learner can be a huge challenge. The complexities of the teacher's task in today's diverse and inclusive classroom cannot be understated.
Teaching effectively to a heterogeneous population of different learners requires a variety of skill sets. Few classroom teachers are given the opportunity to acquire these skills in their training. Resources are often scarce, limiting the availability of adequate classroom support. Understanding and identifying the barriers to learning is the first step to knowing what resources are needed. Paradoxical characteristics are the hallmark of students who are the focus of this presentation. Although some may never receive a formal diagnosis, the many labels or diagnoses associated with such students include SLI, Specific Language Impairment, ADHD, Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, EFD, Executive Function Disorder, ASD, Autism Spectrum Disorder, Dyslexia, ODD, Oppositional Defiant Disorder, GTLD, Gifted Learning Disabled. The term that is most appropriate for this type of student is twice exceptional. The term twice exceptional refers to the paradox of a child's disabling weaknesses and coexisting superior strengths. Identification is often very difficult. While external physical differences such as eye color are relatively easy to observe, internal differences such as intellectual ability are much more difficult to detect. Identification is complicated by the fact that so often the child's gift may mask their weaknesses, or a weakness can overshadow inherent talent. American psychologist George Lynn has described the notion of genius as referring to an unconscious pattern in the personality that guides a person toward the fulfillment of his or her particular potential. Its character becomes known in a child's special interests, capabilities, vulnerabilities, and dreams. Described this way, genius is one's creative guiding spirit, or genie.
Many twice exceptional children have a deep and driving need to pursue their personal and unique genie or passion at any social cost. These children take on the role of being system disturbers, disturbing the way it's always been, challenging assumptions, answering each question with a new question, and refusing to be passive learners. Others may appear to behave and follow social and educational expectations, and yet they feel their difference silently and through other forms of alienation and isolation.
Society admires from afar the great talent and achievements of the world's greatest scientific and creative minds. However, based on what is known of their learning experiences, these are not necessarily the kinds of students who were easy to teach. These personalities, with a strong potential for failure, had the stamina, drive, and perseverance to overcome early learning challenges. For some, the support of a family member or mentor was also crucial to their success. It is impossible to count the cost to society of those brilliant minds who were not able to overcome their challenges.
This is For the Love of Learning, Voices of the Alternative Education Movement. I'm Lainie Liberti, and this is episode number 18. In tonight's episode, we take a look at some of the issues surrounding educating gifted and twice exceptional children. For many gifted children, school can be a challenge, but for twice exceptional learners, parents, and educators, it can be equally confusing and frustrating. Twice exceptional, or 2E, is defined as being gifted or of high intelligence in addition to having a disability of some kind. Common second exceptionalities are autism spectrum disorder, intentional disorders, and behavioral issues, sensory processing disorders, dyslexia, and others. There are no clear-cut profiles of twice exceptional children. Many argue that this population of learner could be considered the most misunderstood of all exceptionalities. In each situation, the 2E students' strengths help to compensate for deficits. The deficits, on the other hand, make the child's strengths less apparent. The interplay of exceptional strengths and weaknesses in a single individual results in inconsistency in perceived performance in and out of the classroom. Tonight, we explore the challenges faced by 2E children with a panel of experts who have passionately dedicated their lives to these learners. I'm going to give a brief introduction to each of our panelists, and then we'll start the conversation. Although these introductions are brief, we have more information about each of our panelists on the show notes page located at consciousconsumernetwork.tv, and look for the show notes page for episode number 18. There you will find more extensive information about their backgrounds and links to each of their projects and websites. So let's jump right in. Our first panelist tonight is Melanie. Dr. Melanie Hayes has made it her life's work to help twice exceptional children find their niche and work to their strengths. To that end, she has created Big Minds Unschool, a micro-school for 2E children that lets them learn without limits through mentoring and supporting their intellectual, social, and emotional well-being. Melanie holds a doctorate in educational leadership with a focus on twice exceptionality. Melanie has 2E twins, and so she experiences life with 2E children on a personal level as well as professionally. Welcome, Melanie. I'm so thrilled you've joined us tonight.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here.
Also on tonight's panel is Susan. Susan Baum, Ph.D., is the director of 2E Center for Research and Professional Development at Bridges Academy, a school for twice exceptional students, and is the academic coordinator for SUNY Buffalo State College Master's Program for International Educators. She is the 2010 recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award granted by the Winefield Group for her contributions to the field of education for twice exceptional learners. To her credit, Susan has many awards, honors, and publications to her name, and is considered a passionate expert in the field. Susan, we are so honored to have you here tonight on this panel. Welcome. And next, I'd like to introduce you to Dani. Dani is a homeschooling mom of 4 amazingly diverse children. Dani's 7-year-old son, who is on the autism spectrum, gave Dani the opportunity to expand her ideas of education and learning. Dani was a political activist in the areas of maternal and infant health and environmental pollutants and toxins in our daily lives for over a decade. And I'd also like to mention Dani has a popular show here on CCN called Transpicious News. Welcome, Dani. Your show is just before ours, and I thank you for staying up late to be on this very important panel.
Oh, thank you, Lainie. I'm so excited to do this show tonight. I know it's going to be awesome.
It will indeed. I'm so sure of that. And finally, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Edward Amond. Edward is a clinical psychologist who focuses on the social, emotional, and educational needs of gifted and talented youth, adults, and their families. He has worked in both private practice and community mental settings, as well as in consulting positions with clinics, hospitals, schools, and other organizations. He presents locally and nationally on topics related to the needs of gifted children. In addition to multiple articles on the subject, Edward has co-authored 2 award-winning books, A Parent's Guide to Gifted Children and Misdiagnosis and Dual Diagnosis of Gifted Children and Adults, ADHD, Bipolar, OCD, Asperger's, Depression, and Other Disorders. Edward is known as a strong advocate for the gifted community. Welcome, Edward. We're so thrilled you're with us here tonight.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
So, Ed, let's start the conversation with you. Let's set the stage. Could you share with us a little bit more about your work and why you focused your career on serving this community?
Well, sure. It starts a long time ago when I was in graduate school. I didn't really exactly know what I wanted to do with my life at that point, and a professor came up to me and asked me after a class if I'd like to work with him. And as many of you know, if a professor asks you that question in graduate school, the correct answer is yes, sir, I'd love to. And it just happened to be a fellow by the name of Dr. Jim Webb. And Dr. Webb is really the fellow who literally wrote the book on the social and emotional needs of gifted and talented youth, the book Guiding the Gifted Child, about 35 years ago. And Jim asked me if he'd like to work with me. And I really didn't exactly know what he did, but it turned out that he worked with gifted and talented kids. And that's what got me into working with that particular population. And of course, whenever you're working with gifted and talented kids, it leads to working with twice exceptional kids. Those gifted children who also have exceptionalities like learning disability and ADHD were very commonly seen. And certainly over the course of the last 25 years, our knowledge of this population has grown, and it's been very exciting to be a part of the work that's been done related to the twice exceptional population.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It seems to me like it's really important work where there are a lot of discoveries made about twice exceptional children, development, a lot of discoveries developed in the field during your course, during your time working in this field. I'm sorry, I'm not clear tonight.
That's okay. We have seen quite a bit of change. We, certainly when we first started, people were wondering, if a child's gifted, can they also have a learning disability? Can they also have an exceptionality? And the answer, of course, is yes. But that certainly was not common knowledge when we started in this field. And thanks to the work of lots of people like Susan and a number of other folks, we've gotten the word out that, yeah, this is a very common situation, and learning about the needs of these kids has been a very exciting development, and trying to figure out exactly who these kids are and what they need over the course of the years has been very exciting.
So you're coming to this from the psychology background. how does that play into the learning stages of, or the learning needs of a twice exceptional child?
Well, working with, anytime you're working with this population, part of what you're working with is the school situation to make sure that their needs are met. But not only are we focusing on the educational side, we're also focusing on the social and emotional side, understanding the social and emotional needs. Every gifted child is just about every gifted child is uneven in their development, in the sense that they're chronologically one age and intellectually or academically advanced in certain areas. And then other skills and talents may be grade level, may be lower than expectancy. And when you run into a twice exceptional child, the gaps between where their strengths are and their weaknesses are just so much greater. So that unevenness really plays a huge role in determining the best educational setting for those twice exceptional students. And really that varies significantly across twice exceptional kids, who what educational situation works well for one may not work at all for a different one with a different exceptionality or a different type of giftedness.
Yeah, thank you. This is a beautiful introduction, and I'm so grateful you're on this panel. I'd like to jump over to Melanie next. Melanie, if you could share with us a little bit about your background and what brought you into this line of work. I know you have some very personal reasons as well.
Yeah, thanks. I was a teacher in the regular public school for about 10 years and had a lot of gifted kids in my classroom, and seemed like people gave me the most troubled kids to work with because I seemed to be able to reach them. And then I had children of my own and stayed home with them. And it turned out that both of my twins, I have a son and a daughter who are 14-year-old twins now. And they were both twice exceptional. And so I had been working from home, and then I tried to go back to work as a teacher again. And in kindergarten, it was a disaster for both of my children. So I decided I would have to figure out something else. So I started doing consulting in the field of twice exceptionality. That was after I determined that's what my kids, what the diagnosis was for my own children. And I had worked as an educational consultant for about 6 years. And what I saw was there was quite a bit of work and research done for the academic fields with twice exceptional kids, but there wasn't as much for how they functioned in the rest of their lives. And so I ended up eventually going back and getting my doctorate, and I focused on twice exceptional children in all aspects of their lives. So it's a big passion for me, both because my own children, I've watched them struggle, but I've also watched the many, many families I've worked with struggle and try to find something that works for their children. And oftentimes being in a regular public school setting, despite everybody's best efforts, despite parent advocacy, these kids just fall between the cracks and they are never able to show what they actually can do. They tend to just kind of look like average kids in the classroom rather than being able to tap into their incredible strengths. And so that's why I eventually designed Big Minds, so that we could have a school where it focuses completely on the kids' strengths and helps them be with other kids that are just like them and be able to have a really good learning experience and a good social and emotional experience.
Melanie, did you get any resistance from the academic world as you started your school?
Yes, I did. I know a lot of people think that this is an unschool model, could never work, that the kids are just here playing. I've had people say that it looks like a preschool for elementary kids. But actually, this is exactly what our kids need. They need, because of a lot of them have intense anxiety and sensory processing disorder, they need to be able to move through their day and determine how they're going to move through their day. So for example, at our school, if there's a lesson happening that the kids don't want to do, they have the option to opt out and go do something else. We use technology. Each kid has an iPad that they can use for research and developing their ideas. If they need to go outside and swing or run around, they can do that. Because one thing I know about 2E kids is if you try to put them all in a room and force them all to attend to the same lesson, it's like herding squirrels, you know. They're not that interested in doing the same thing at the same time because they all have passions in widely diverse areas. And so as I was researching and trying to figure out what the best design for the school would be, I came up with the idea that we had to do sort of an unschool model so each kid could pursue the thing that they're most passionate about.
I actually want to get into this a little bit later on in the conversation, that this is something that obviously I can relate to very well because I'm an unschooling parent as well. But what I'm not sure about are the social and emotional needs and how those are met in a school environment. But let's get to that within the panel discussion a little bit later on. Thank you so much, Melanie, for a beautiful introduction, and I'm so looking forward to hearing more. I'd like next to jump over to Dani. Dani, you're coming to this panel from a different perspective. Most of our panelists here tonight are working in the field of twice exceptional children, and you are a traveling activist parent and so much more. And I really wanted you here on this panel because I thought that you'd bring a totally different perspective. And maybe you could share with us a little bit about your background and how this show is relevant to you and your life.
Oh, thank you so much, Lainie. It's, you know, when you talk about 2E kids, and I have to just say, I absolutely love that description. It's a relatively new one for me. And I just fell in love with the actual description of how it defines these children without defining them. I have worked with kids my whole life. I have 5 kids, though my eldest is now grown up and married, so he doesn't count anymore. But I've worked my whole life with children. I was one of those people who I started babysitting when I was 10. And all the way through, I've been kind of the mama hen to so many diverse kids. Adopted mom, kind of for all my children's friends, etc. And because of that, I've had this incredible ability to see all this broad spectrum, even through my own life of growing up, of kids. When my eldest daughter was born, who's almost 13, I was heavily into political activism. My focus at the time was maternal and infant health. And because of that, I worked very, very closely with online groups, parenting groups, mother support groups within the communities. And that opened up this whole new vast amount of doors, because now you're meeting more parents, more children. And I got to meet a lot of women who were in situations where we were in, at that time, we were in Toronto, downtown Toronto, where you were talking extremely limited in availability of options. When it comes down to it, if you have a 2E child or a child that has any special needs whatsoever, you become very limited. So therefore, I met this incredible group of mothers who were very, let's say, organically oriented towards working with their child. Parents who were very aware of the emotional needs and to actually reach out and meet those emotional needs and recognize the fact that the regular school systems couldn't possibly do that. And because of that, before my little 2E dude came into my life, I had already had a lot of experience dealing with kids from a good friend of mine who's 15-year-old who had autism, and he was extremely emotionally low functioning, but his intelligence was so off the scale that they couldn't keep him in a school because he could beat any teacher at any question they wanted to ask within 30 seconds. And, you know, so I had this incredible experience that prepared me. And I actually joke about that, looking back on my life, of all the little situations we've been put in to prepare us for the journey that we're on. My little dude showed up. And when he is very much an Asperger's child in some categories. But again, like all 2E kids, none of them ever really fit into a pigeonhole, right? And that's the worst thing I think that the school system does, is it tries to pigeonhole children into these cookie cutter cutouts. So when he showed up, I was able to very quickly recognize that there were differences between his two older sisters and the way he dealt with situations. He is very limited in his emotional ability to deal with change and his emotional ability to deal with his emotions. And when it got to kindergarten, all hell broke loose, because I come from a lot of my family. It's all very conservative background, and I have friends who are teachers, and I have an aunt who's a teacher. So you get the lectures. Oh, he must go to school because he's got to learn, and he's got to learn to sit still, and he has to learn to sit quiet and do these things. So I was at that time financially, I was considering the fact that I may have to go back to full-time work. So I thought, okay, we're going to try this kindergarten thing. We'll try. It lasted 3 days before the teachers asked me to take him away, which was horrifying. The teacher was, yeah, we won't even go down that road. Yeah, we'll just drop that comment. And I started this evolution of education. And because I had everyone trying to force me to, he must learn this way, you must stick to a curriculum. Because at that point, then it was like we'd already been in and out of the country so many times that even my girls were back to kind of saying, if he's staying home, we're not going back to school either. So you're stuck with all of us. It's like, okay, all homeschooling again. And it was really hard. And I had to stick to my guns, because the one thing I recognized is the more I pushed him to do something like learn his ABCs, you must learn your ABCs, the more he pushed back. And it got, the emotional outbursts became worse. So I finally stood up to everyone and told them all to go take a jump off a short cliff. And I said, I'm doing it my way. I'm the one who's teaching him. I'm doing it my way. And I stopped teaching him. I just stopped. And he listened in that way that a lot of 2E kids do, where they're not looking like they pay attention, and they look like they're playing a video game, and yet the sponge just sucks it all in. And he had no interest in math. He had no interest in drawing. He had very, very difficulties with fine motor control with holding a pencil, and it would just frustrate him. So I went and I bought the biggest sidewalk chalk I could find, because he could hold it. And we just drew pictures with that. And then one day, actually it was just when we first moved to Morocco about 2.5 years ago, he saw his daddy playing a video game that he really, really liked. And it was like a role-playing game. And his dad said to him, well, you can't play this game because you can't read. And he said, oh. And he promptly taught himself how to read in 3 weeks. And now he's 7, he reads at a grade 8 level. And there's no word that he can't sound out. He doesn't have it like this. And I was able to literally stand back at that moment and to everyone going, see, I was right, you were wrong. That's what you can do with your normal education system. So that was my little trip down, my battle won, to be able to say, no, I will educate my kids the way I want to educate them. And we spend every day, and we're right on the ocean. And my 12-year-old daughter can tell you more about jellyfish and sharks and what seaweed the plankton need to have than probably most marine biologists, because that's what interests them. And I'm just like, go for it. You don't want to read out loud today? You don't want to read at all today? You want to run in the sand and get out the pocket microscope and look at all the tiny microshells? Awesome, let's go. And that's it. And that's our journey.
That's such a great story, Dani. I'm so glad you're here. Through my research preparing for this show, I read so many case studies about these 2E kids. And what you've just shared is the common theme that I've read. I'm not an expert on anything, but this is the information that's out there. And what I discovered is these 2E kids are fiercely individual. And so I think they're there in the school systems to remind us that education needs to be an individual journey. So thank you so much for sharing your journey, and I cannot wait to get into this panel deeper. But first, let's jump over to Susan. Susan, I cannot wait to hear your introduction, a little bit of your background, and what led you down the path to focusing on these twice exceptional kids and these gifted children.
Well, I started out in special education and elementary education, and my first job teaching was with 2E kids, but we didn't know that then. It was so far back in that last century that I had started a class for very bright children who were hyperactive on home instruction, and we were calling them minimally brain damaged. Their IQs range from 120 to 150. They were 6 and 7 years old. And it was the beginning of talking about learning disabilities. We just started to use that term. And I had no idea that those children would define my career. So I taught those children for a while and decided I thought they were normal. I ought to go teach regular kids to see why these kids weren't fitting into the regular setting. And in doing that, I taught elementary school kids, and in the meantime, went for my master's degree in learning disabilities. And when I got my first job as a learning disability teacher consultant, I was introduced to the world of gifted. I hadn't had much interest in gifted kids yet. And I was put in this position in this school district that needed to identify which children were gifted and talented, because the state of New Jersey was looking at identifying these children. So anyone in my district who was a learning disability teacher consultant now was on a committee for gifted and talented. And at the same time, we had started some pilot programs in the school where I was for gifted kids. So I thought, well, maybe I ought to learn more about gifted kids. So I took a graduate course in educating gifted children. I went to a wonderful conference called Confertute, which was a crystallizing experience for me. I said, this is the most exciting teaching I've ever seen. What's coming out of gifted education. These poor kids in special education don't get benefits from this wonderful, creative, enriching education. And some of them are so smart, and we're boring them to tears and with remediating them. And so I was knowing I wanted to get a doctorate and deciding, do I want to get this doctorate in learning disabilities or in gifted education? So I thought, well, I ought to become a teacher of the gifted and bring that kind of practical experience to any doctoral program. So I got a job teaching the gifted, and then I went off to get my doctorate in gifted education. And at that time, we just started to talk about gifted handicapped. The first book that came out on Twice Exceptional was by June Maker many, many, many years ago, and we call these kids gifted handicapped. So we've gone a long way from gifted handicapped to twice exceptional. The whole language defines our perception, and twice exceptional is so much more a positive word than gifted handicapped. But at any rate, I went to get my doctorate, and there was very, very little research on these kids at the time. And I just decided that my vision was to try to make a difference in these kids who had these learning disabilities, attention deficits, by looking at them, how are they different, and dedicating my life to the role of talent development and away from a remedial approach to these kids. And it's been a wonderful journey. I was lucky to have a job for 20 years in a graduate school outside of New York City, where we were able to get many grants that were available to actually see what happens when you put kids these kids with special needs in an enriched environment based on their gifts and talents. The remarkable impact that made on their progress. And it was just joyous. So then 10 years ago, I met the people at Bridges Academy. And they enticed me away from my full-time job as a full professor outside of New York City to be part of this wonderful journey. They were just starting themselves, and they had a new head of school. And I got to have my own lab school. So I understand the joy of saying, gee, we can make a difference. We don't need to follow the rules of public education. We're not even a non-public school because we don't want to always follow those rules. But we do get children who are on IEPs and do help do serve them appropriately. But it's in our way, as you ladies were both saying. We do it our way. Don't give us another way to do it.
Yeah, I love that. What a great path. I'm really, really interested in finding out what your personal discovery was working with gifted kids, and if there was a point where you started to notice that, a high percentage of them were 2E kids, if they were not already identified as such.
Well, we have to remember we're looking at almost 3 populations of these children. So coming out of special education, my first frustration was sitting in a special ed classroom are these brilliant children. They are not reading. So as Ed said earlier, they don't think they're smart. But so out of the special ed population, we found as many as 33% of the kids would have a high potential in important areas, not being served as gifted at all. And so I think for me, my whole work came from those kids who we never even noticed were gifted. And then we have to look at the population. Here are a bunch of gifted kids who are being called lazy, that they're, when they're so gifted, and why aren't they doing better in school? And no one had discovered that they did have these learning disabilities or attention deficits, and no one was accommodating them. And then we wonder about all those children whose gifts hide their disabilities and disabilities hide their gifts. So there are many, many of these kids all around us in any setting we go to. But what I find consistently, no matter which of these populations we're dealing with, they need to understand why their brains are different. Not that they're disabled. There's just lots of neurodiversity in the world. And the other thing, they need to know that they have a talent in something that deserves to be developed in its own right, not as a reward, not when their remediation is finished. It is a non-negotiable in working with these kids.
That is so beautiful and affirming. I'm so thrilled that you said that. My next question was going to be, but it's not now, was going to be, why is it important to identify these children? But you just summed that up beautifully. I wonder, taking it a bit further, in what manner are these children identified? What if the instructors, teachers, families, students, what if they don't know of twice exceptional children? And I'll take this question to the panel. And Susan, if you'd like to chime in on this first, please do. If the question really is, if the public, teachers and so forth, are not educated about 2E kids, what happens?
Yeah, that's a problem. Awareness is our biggest problem. I think all of you would agree that we need to build awareness among everyone that these kids exist. And it is still true that we hear they cannot be both. And so that is very, very frustrating. So how do we go about creating awareness? Here's your show on tonight. Thank you for helping. We need to be in the schools. We need to be talking to teachers. But I think parents are going to have to be our first line of fire because they see it. And I think the movement is growing because here you are, 3 of you are or 2 of you are parents of these children. They are making our field move forward. I've been working in it a long time. There's only so much you can do as a researcher or, a consultant. But parents have power because they live with these children. They know they're bright and they know something isn't right. And they can see why school isn't working for them. And so once we can bring parents to the table and say, I need to have my child evaluated, I think then we have a start, because we have lots of ways to evaluate these kids. They are there, but we need to make, if we don't notice it in schools, that we ask for an assessment, the parents are going to have to bring it to our attention. So I think others have something to say. I can come back in later.
I agree with Susan. I think one of the biggest problems is parents hit this bureaucratic brick wall every time they try to advocate for their kids. A lot of times our kids look like average kids in the classroom, and so they're not failing in a large enough margin to be able to be identified as being either special needs or gifted. A lot of times they test them for giftedness using inappropriate measures, like they might use a standardized test or a regular psychological test. And these kids don't often test in the gifted range because their disabilities pull their scores down. So they don't actually disaggregate the data to show what score is showing that this kid is actually gifted. What they do is lump it all together and they say, well, look how low this student is. This is definitely a special ed student. And the other thing that always happens is a lot of these kids, who I call the exploders, are the behavior problems. And so they don't look at them as being kids who have this vast potential. They look at them as being disruptive. And so it becomes more about control and compliance than about meeting the needs of the kids.
Right. I think our biggest challenge is that one label per customer myth, that they can't be this and that. They must only be one or the other. And that was so common when we first started when I first started in this field, is that they had to be this or they couldn't be both. There's no way that they could be gifted and have ADHD. Please, that just doesn't exist. And of course, we know that it really, really does. And when you see that interplay of the ability and the disability, it can present, as Susan was saying, in several different ways. And one of I think the hardest ones to find is that kid who's going along doing fine. Everybody thinks they're just a good student. They're solid. They're above average. Occasionally we see them do really, really well on some project, and they go, wow, he was really motivated on that, or she really got into this topic. And then on the next, project, wow, they didn't do so well on this one. They just didn't really like that very much. And so instead of pinpointing a disability, what they find, what they point to is, as Susan was saying, is motivation. Oh, this kid's just not motivated. He's lazy, or that's the problem. Or he only works when he wants to, or if he's interested. And really, if we look closely at some of these kids and the products and the things that they're doing in school, we see that when they do well, we're hitting a strength area. When they do poorly, we're hitting a weak area. And it doesn't appear that way, though, to people who aren't aware of the needs of social or the twice exceptional population. And so it's really, really a difficulty. And so that's where the evaluation, the comprehensive assessment comes in, to find these kids' strengths, to find their weaknesses. What do we know about them? Where are their talents, and how can we use those?
Yeah, and in addition, I think a lot of people believe that it's only the public schools, and I think it's important to note that a lot of private schools also don't serve the needs of 2E kids. They try to do the same traditional learning model. They don't work to their strengths. They don't adequately mitigate their disabilities, and they certainly don't provide them with a true peer network. And so these kids oftentimes, again, even in a private school, are seen as major behavior problems, or lazy, or socially dysfunctional in some way. And oftentimes it has to do specifically with the environment they're in, not only the curriculum that they're presented with.
Well, it's interesting because, again, I had a really good friend who had, when my little dude was 2, hers was 7, the same age my guy is now. And she went through hell in the school system. Because now this was Canadian school system, downtown Toronto, like I said, if he had gotten a doctor's certificate saying, well, he has, and give it A, B, C, D, or E, autism being the first one, Asperger's, etc., then the school could apply to get a special assistant to come in to help him and spend the time. Well, I mean, she was very fortunate that she'd been with her family doctor for 28 years. So she went in and said, look, just do me a favor. Just write me a note saying that he's got Asperger's. because we don't know what he is, because he doesn't fall in, just like most of these kids, they don't fall into a category. So she got the help from a doctor's note. But there are so many parents out there who can't get the help from the education system because the schools don't have the funding to bring in the specialists needed, the teacher's assistants, to bring in someone who's got training with working with children like this. Unless they get, they jump through this hoop and that hoop and get through this piece of red tape. And it's true when we talk about it's the parents need to be educated that no, their child isn't a problem child. Their child has special needs that aren't being met. It's the teachers, it's the school system, but it's also the medical professionals as well, because you need to have someone who actually spends the time to even help a parent understand, because that's the problem. You get labels that are so overused, like ADHD or dyslexia. And they're so overused that they lose what is behind it. So that parents are lost in this, there's vast amounts of information. Oh, your child has ADD. Oh, great. Okay. And then you got 85,000 websites and books. And it doesn't get you any farther because you've got no one to guide you. And this is the problem where we need to bring communities together on all the levels, from educators to parents to the medical professionals, so that everyone can work together to help these children.
I think one of the major problems we face is that people never really understand what giftedness is. And they see giftedness as children who are practically perfect in every way, teacher pleasers, and get all their work done. And because of that, they don't understand, and I'll give you 3 examples. One, they don't understand how ADHD can get so confused with giftedness. I mean, I know Ed, in that book that Ed was part of, it's a wonderful, wonderful book by Jim and company. And what we see is that we know for kids to attend, information has to be novel. We know from the best brain research now that you cannot keep your attention if the teacher is moving too slowly, if the conversation is moving too slowly, or am I the worst? Sit on the floor, crisscross applesauce. These little kindergarten kids who have to roll around on the rug to pay attention. And now they're saying it's ADHD. It may be. I'm not saying it isn't. But what I am saying, a bright little child who has to sit still and wait his turn while everyone else gets the concept that they've known for years, it's educational abuse. Instead, we say Ritalin is the answer. And so we see that. And the newer thing that I'm worried about, if you go to the preschool clinics of kids who are on the spectrum, and we bring in these very, very bright children, they don't know what to do with them. So they're fixated on dinosaurs, not passionate. They're in flow, and they'll say they're perseverating. And they're giving negative names to what we know. We want kids engaged with passions, sustained through this interest. And we're saying, they're fixated, they're perseverating. You got to get them off to another interest. They want them to have social skills to get along with their peers, but they're chronological peers, not their intellectual peers. They'll take a young child who might need some social skills training and put them in with their age mates with whom they have nothing in common. So how can we socialize? There is an extremely difficult for them to understand giftedness and that coincidence. That coincidence makes every decision different. And so until we get giftedness better, there's no hope that they're going to understand this coincidence of disability with ability. It's a steep, steep mountain, hill to climb.
I want to chime in on that on both professional and personal level. I, like Dee, had experienced a lot of the same sort of thing with my children. My son, we were in one of the best school districts in California. My son was promised that he would be accelerated. He went into kindergarten reading at a 12th grade level and doing 5th grade math. My daughter was also extremely advanced. They were told we would be accommodated. I worked at the same school, and what happened was I watched the slow erosion and bullying of my children to the point where their self-esteem and their love of learning was completely, they disengaged from it entirely. They started to have extreme emotional distress. My daughter was severely bullied, and she was such a perfectionist that they made her stay in for recess because she didn't get her work done, so she had to stay and do more of the same. My son would finish early, and they would give him more of the same worksheets to occupy his time. And when I tried to talk to the principal about it, she said, well, if we let him do 5th grade work in kindergarten, what are we going to do next year? We only go to 5th grade. And so there's this lack of imaginative solution for these kids. And it is emotional abuse. I see so many families, the trauma that they go through, and it's not just that the kids disengage from learning, but as this goes on, these kids develop some severe psychological damage. I mean, I have kids that are suicidal, kids that are completely unable to relate to their peers because they've been so burned, they just completely shut down, and they're uninterested in any kind of schooling at all, uninterested in participating in any kind of social activity at all. And so it's like Susan's saying, you're asking them to be with their age peers. That's not who their peers are. So until we can start to look at each individual and say, this is what this child needs socially, emotionally, intellectually, and physically, because some of these kids need quiet spaces, some of them need active spaces. It depends on the individual child. So until we start doing that, we're not going to meet the needs of these children. And it's an incredible waste of their talent.
Yes. And all because we're going to run out of math at 5th grade. Because we can't possibly do anything else with them beyond 5th grade math, because our schooling goes to 5th grade, because there's no more curriculum beyond that. Of course, we all know that's there's plenty of math to go around, and we've got the opportunity to serve these kids in that way. There's so many examples of these twice exceptional kids. You know, early in my career, I ran across a child who had come to my office for an evaluation, having already been identified with ADHD of the inattentive type. The parents had put him on medication as the physician had recommended, but it wasn't helping, and nothing was getting any better. And so they brought him in for an evaluation to try and find out, what's going on here. He seems bright, but he's not doing well in school. And well, he was a 2nd grader, and it turns out he was doing math at an 8th grade level and reading at an 11th grade level. Not surprised that he was kind of disengaged in the school setting. And once we were able to help the parents understand, hey, this is where this child is. These are the things that he needs. We were able to communicate with the school. We were able to allow the child to be educated at a level that was much closer to where he needed to be educated. Of course, we didn't move him to 8th grade or 11th grade, but we addressed his needs in an appropriate way to help him stay engaged in the classroom. And those are the challenges that we face every day. I mean, just the other day, I got an email from a parent who was told that her child was told that in a meeting that they were told that their child couldn't sit still with his feet on the floor, and how could he possibly learn if he couldn't sit up straight with his feet on the floor? And I was like, really? This is where we are. He can't sit up straight, so he can't possibly learn. These are some of the challenges, yeah, and they're very, very frustrating. And the education about giftedness, about twice exceptional, is really something that we've got to continue to do. And so certainly appreciate this opportunity to talk about it to hopefully a very, very large audience.
It's really, really interesting when you talk about the identity. Apparently I can't talk. It's after 2:00 in the morning now. When we talk about identifying kids, and I wanted to go back to this about parents. You've got a 2-income family, and both parents are working, and they're working, by the time they leave home and get home and pick up kids and have dinner, it's 12 hours. They're exhausted. They a lot of times don't have the time or the ability to know where to look for the help. We had a woman that I met in one of the community parenting groups that I was running. She was from Israel, and her husband was Palestinian, and they had lived in Spain, and then they moved to France, and they had a Russian woman who was babysitting the kids. And her third daughter, who at the time was about 7, couldn't read, couldn't write. And this school, and she was a very quiet woman, and it took a lot for her to come out of her shell. And she finally got comfortable enough to say to me, like, I'm having a problem. Could you help me? The school is telling me that I have to do all these things with her daughter, Anna, and I have to like push her to do this, and I have to force her to do 4 hours of homework every night. Oh, because she has to catch up. So we go, and because a lot of the times her daughter was in school, I never met her daughter before. And I'd listened to her talk about how the difficulty, she couldn't read. She couldn't even recognize the letters. And everyone in the school was trying to tell her that her daughter was retarded. Literally, they used that word. She was too stupid to be passed from grade 2 to grade 3 because she couldn't even read or do the ABCs. We sat down in a meeting, and it just so happened there was a bunch of other people standing around. And I watched this child stand in the middle, hold a conversation with 6 people at the exact same time in 6 different freaking languages. And I stood there and was just like, Isabel, did you just? And she was like, well, yeah, she does it all the time. She translates for everyone else in the family when no one else is understanding. And I'm like, and your school's telling you your child is retarded? The child's brilliant. I defy an adult to stand there and hold a conversation with 6 people in 6 different languages all at the same time. And yet she was convinced, like she was just devastated that they were telling her she was going to have to put her daughter in a special school for slow children. And we went to the school board and we fought, and we got her daughter put into a special language school. Well, guess what? They jumped her ahead 2 years because she was so far advanced, but she couldn't read and write. She was severely, severely dyslexic. She couldn't even see letters. So all the teacher did was just say, right, everything we do, we're just going to do it verbally. Never mind books and writing. If you can't write, so let's talk. And they did. But it took people coming together to support this mother to know that the school was wrong, because she was brought up in a culture where when the school principal said this, it was, yes, sir. You know, you don't question authority. You have to do it. We need to support the parents to know when to go to bat for their kids.
I think Dani hits on 2 really important things. One, parents need a good support network, because first off, parenting a twice exceptional child is very difficult and involved and also extremely joyful, but you can't talk about either to regular folks. They either think you're bragging or they don't understand what you're going through. So that's really important that there's the social network. The other piece is that I don't think it's right the parents of 2E kids have to fight so hard to get an appropriate education for their child. Why should they have to know all the ins and outs of the education system, all the ins and outs of the medical and therapeutic system? Why should they have to know every way to fight for every little scrap that their kid needs when neurotypical, neurodiverse children can go through school? And I'm not saying that it's great for any of them, but at least they get their needs met without their parents having to turn themselves inside out to make this happen. The second piece that Dani talked about is the incredible difference it makes when you get a kid into the right situation. And in my case, my son, who was exhibiting extreme OCD as a way of coping with his anxiety disorder, my daughter was completely withdrawing and refusing to do any kind of work. When we got them into an appropriate situation, my son, in the space of 3 years, went all the way from 5th grade to master's level number theory in mathematics. And just absolutely blew everybody out of the water. And my daughter is writing a novel who everybody that reads it can't believe it's written by a person her age. So I just think it's imperative that we get the word out. You know, I mean, I'd like to be the Temple Grandin of 2E. I'd like to disseminate this publicly so people really understand what these families are going through, because I don't think people appreciate how hard the parents are working and how devastated the children are.
Yeah, this is a really good point. I'd like to ask this panel if you had to make a recommendation for a modality of education for teaching and for learning, if teaching is part of that modality, what would be your recommendation?
Well, I can step in. I know what Susan was talking about at her school is the same type of thing that we're doing at our school, is that we let each children work to their, each of the kids work to their strength. We don't try to make them these well-rounded children. We're not trying to get them at least to standards that are average standards in every area. We're trying to let them work towards the thing that they're the very best at, because that's probably the thing that they're going to gravitate towards in their working adult life. And we want to build the strengths in that area. Do we want them to have basic life skills math? Sure. But they're not probably at age 7 or 8 going to connect to math in any meaningful way. And if you try to force them to, they're going to end up hating math and being disconnected from it their whole life. So if you just move it along and try to show them the ways that math might be beautiful or somehow tie into the thing that they're interested in, or writing, or whatever it is. And then the same thing Susan said they're doing is, we don't, if you have severe fine motor skills so that you can't, your hand actually won't allow you to put what your brain is thinking on paper, then you don't require them to write anything. You don't require them to keyboard anything. We have technology now. They can use talk to text. They can dictate to a teacher. There's ways for these kids to get out the incredible knowledge they have without having to be beaten over the head with this. We must do it this way. Everybody has to learn to write in cursive. Everybody has to learn to keyboard. Everybody has to learn to do the mad minute math. Everybody has to learn their multiplication facts. None of that stuff works for 2E kids. And until we recognize that, we're never going to be able to meet this population's needs.
I want to add to that. One of the problems is I feel that our many people, even in our field, don't see the complexity of this the way, Melanie, you explained, because they think all we need to do is get the right accommodations and these kids are going to be fine. I'm not saying in the public schools accommodations aren't helpful, but for our population, they can be poison. These children don't want to do things any differently from anybody else. Number one. So number two, you need a teacher who doesn't say, your child can do it another way, but the rest of you all do it the way I want you to do it. That is insulting and belittling, and you certainly don't feel like you're a valued member in the classroom. We need teachers who give everybody choices. We give teachers who give kids lots of different ways to access the curriculum. The movement in school now, and we're doing a lot of this in Bridges, is more of a personalized learning. What's your playlist? This is, you can just, even if it's the state curriculum, how do you want to learn it? Do you want to learn it by looking at a movie? Do you want to read about it? Do you want to have a field trip? You tell us how you're going to learn what we need you to learn. And then what of these 4 or 5 choices is going to be allowed for you to tell what you learned? But if you only do it for the twice exceptional child in the classroom, that child will be bullied by the rest of the class. We know one youngster who says you only get good marks because you do your test in another room, and a lot of these 2E kids think that these accommodations are intellectual cheating. So it's about the system changing, not about how do we accommodate for this one youngster in the room. And it's, and yes, I can go on and on, but I want to let Ed have a turn. I think we all have important things to say about this topic because it is the critical topic.
Yes, and when we identify that twice exceptionality, I think some folks think that, well, we've got it, we've identified it, we're at the end now, we know what it is. But just like identifying a disability or identifying giftedness, it is nowhere near the end point. It's just the beginning of a long journey to try and figure out what that means. And you know, I do quite a few evaluations of twice exceptional kids, trying to identify their strengths and weaknesses. And I'm incredibly frustrated when families come in to the office and they have had an evaluation and they've spent, you know, in some cases, thousands of dollars for an evaluation, and they still have no idea what to do. They say, what does this mean? What do we do with all this information? Because, you know, it seemed like we reached the end point. They told us it was twice exceptionality, and so we're done. And it's like, well, no, you're really nowhere near the end point. You're just at the beginning and trying to figure out what type of educational setting fits best and what type of accommodations and where and when is, you know, is the huge question with these kids. So.
Yeah, one of the reasons why we put together this panel and are doing a show on this topic is because we've looked at alternative education in the past 17 prior episodes by presenting an alternative in the modalities, whether it be self-directed learning or even systematic schools that are not compulsory, you know, that are more option oriented. And this is the first panel where we're really just looking at the learner and the learner's needs here. So I'm really thrilled and excited to get all this insight, because even though twice exceptional kids have a specific set of needs, it seems to me like we can learn in the alternative education movement across the board from this highly diverse group. So thank you for bringing these issues to light. I'm very, very grateful for each one of you on the panel. Melanie, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I wanted to add that also I think it's really important that parents understand that their kid, all the parenting books, all the typical advice for parenting is not going to work with their kids. And it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with your kid. It means that your kid is a highly intellectual individual who looks at life in a different way. And I think there's a lot of societal pressure for parents to make their kids conform both in and out of school. You know, they need to conform socially. You know, if your kid's the kid at the birthday party that when everybody starts to sing happy birthday, they put their hands over their ears and scream, or when everybody else is playing pin the tail on the donkey, the kid says, you know, it's a really stupid game. I'd rather go and, you know, investigate why this ice is melting over here. You know, so it's embarrassing for the parents if your kid, you know, can't stand to wear clothes, or all the sensory stuff that our kids deal with. The parents feel like somehow they've failed their kid. Somehow their kid's never going to fit into society. Somehow they're failures themselves as parents. A lot of parents maybe themselves were 2E, and so this brings up a lot of haunting, horrible memories from their own childhood. And the thing I want to say to parents is, you have to take it day by day. These kids, they go through stages. If you love them and work towards their strengths and educate yourself about how you can best parent them, they'll turn out great. And I think that's the message I want to parents, is that your kids have the potential to be really incredible human beings. And if parents are just supported in what they're trying to do, then the parents themselves will be able to do what they need to do to help the kids be successes in life.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the, going back to the whole thing of the supporting of parents, of course, because I've worked with so many parenting groups, mother groups, community groups to try and help families, there's a tendency to I don't know, to parrot rote information, to say, oh, well, this study came out and it said that children shouldn't play, and I'm going to use the example of video games. Oh, no, because these video games, if a child plays, you know, more than 15 minutes a day, it's detrimental to them. And then they look at you as you're sitting there allowing your 5-year-old to sit next to you, play his DS at a birthday party because he doesn't want to interact. And he's just sitting there playing his DS. And you get this snide comment. And if it's a parent who's unsure of themselves, who doesn't, you know, who is worried about, well, public opinion doesn't define me, but my little guy, we learned very quickly that when he's overwhelmed, the best thing you can do is hand him a DS. And he gets his DS and he goes into his game and he takes a moment. And if sometimes it takes 5 minutes, for him to just play. And then he goes, it's like, okay, I'm good. And then he's off again. And sometimes if the stress is too much, he needs to be in his little bubble for 2 hours. And when someone comes out to a parent and says, oh, you know, and judges the parent because they've discovered something that works for their child, but because it doesn't conform to what, you know, the studies or what, you know, the mainstream media is telling you is good for the child, then all of a sudden it's, oh, you know, oh, you let your child play video games. Or my son, because he had issues, he had very big issues with fine motor skills. So we learned that I didn't want to make him feel bad. So we gave him bigger things to play with. He now does poi, and you should see him swinging the poi. He loved the Star Wars movies, so Daddy made him wooden lightsabers. And he does Darth Maul spin around, jump kick. Those little things are going all over the place at lightning speed. And you know what? Now we don't worry about the pencil, because you know what? All of a sudden the pencil became irrelevant. And there are parents, again, who judge because your child is stick fighting and he's 5. And they're like, oh, violence. I'm like, no, it's not violence. It's actual physical training for him. And it helps him work out what he wants to work, and his spatial organization. He's learning how to define the space around him, how to move his body, and how to be confident. And that's what it's about. But again, you deal with the judgment of other parents who don't understand. And that is one of the biggest downfalls I find.
Yeah, actually, that's something I want to focus a question to Ed. Ed, since you work in psychology with families, with parents, and with the children themselves, in what way do you find that the families of 2E children need the most support?
I think the parents of 2E students need support in just so many ways. The first is understanding their children. I think they understand them and they understand them well in terms of what they can do, but oftentimes they're faced with the question and being told what's wrong with their kids and not asking, not being asked the question, what's right with this kid? What can this kid do? Remembering that this kid is, as the book of the same name says, that these kids are bright, not broken. There are strengths in all of us, and identifying what those strengths are is the first step. Now, parents typically know that. Unfortunately, sometimes in conversations with educators, that those strengths aren't high on the priority list. They are, from the school's perspective, they're concerned about what this kid can't do. They can't read, they can't do math, they can't sit still, instead of, really they can do this, or they can do this really, really well, because there's no connection. And when I think when parents and educators communicate well, I think it opens the educator's eyes to the things that the child can do, and it also opens the parents' eyes to the real challenges that these kids do have. Sometimes parents don't notice some of their challenges, and so getting that education, finding out where those strengths are, that's the first place to work with support. There's lots and lots of other areas that we can talk about, but really finding out and understanding what those strengths are is the key to educating these kids.
Yeah, thank you. And I know Melanie wanted to jump in, so go ahead. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I wanted to say, in all avenues of these kids' lives, people are looking at them and saying what's wrong with them, because a lot of time the disability overshadows the ability. They tend to be, for example, my son, he had food issues as many 2E kids do. And we had worked for a long time to get him to eat in a restaurant. And we finally went to a restaurant, and he had a thing about his sandwich being cut in half. It was like the end of the world if the sandwich was cut in half. So we had asked the waitress, please don't cut the sandwich in half. And when she brought it to the table cut in half, he had a complete screaming meltdown. And the waitress is like judging us because our kid is behaving so badly in the restaurant. So there's no way for her to see what we've been through to try to bring him step to that point. There's no way for her to see what his abilities are around that. At that point, he was about 3 years old and really going through a geometry phase, and he loved the beauty of the uncut sandwich as a geometric shape. And so, it's things like that. So what happens to parents is they're judged because of the more visibility of the disability. And I wanted to also add something that Dani had said about the iPads or the screen time. My students and I have just completed a study. They were curious why parents were so adamant about kids being on screens. And so we conducted a 2-week study where the kids were allowed to do whatever they wanted on the iPads all day long at school. Yes, I went there, believe it or not. And we did it as a social experiment. We wrote it up as a study. We are going to try to get the study published, but we found some really interesting things. And for twice exceptional kids, the screen is often an intellectual lifeline. And it is also sometimes a social shield. And so sometimes they feel really awkward without it, and they need that, as Dani was saying with her son, he needed that space to just be shielded from what was going on socially so that he could collect himself. And then on the opposite side, they need it for their intellectual stimulation. Just this past week, we did the other side of the study, and we went a week without any screens at all at the school. And every time we'd be doing something, like, for example, one of my students came up with the idea to make Big Minds dollars, and that turned into an all-day lesson about commerce and trade and banking and stock market and supply chain and all this sort of stuff. And all through the day, the kids kept saying, oh, if I could get on the iPad, I could show you this. Oh, if I had the computer, I could show you this. So I feel like when we're given that, oh, you should only be on the screens for 15 minutes, it's like telling a piano virtuoso, you can only have the piano for 15 minutes a day. And so I think it's important for parents to look at what are recommendations from the Academy of Pediatrics and all that sort of stuff, and think about our population, because our population is different. And by the way, the research I did with my kids, everybody says their kids are on only 2 hours or less because that's what the pediatrics are recommending. And the studies show elsewise, they're about 6 hours a day. So
I wanted to add a little bit more about the role of technology with our kids, especially in terms of their socialization. At Bridges, we do allow the kids to take their laptops out during breaks because they socialize through them. Some of them had no way to interact with other kids, so they play games together. Even Minecraft, you realize how socializing Minecraft is and how they get into little groups and they're at their different houses and they're on the same network. They're planning together, talking together. We think it's quite developmental because by the time they're in high school, they want to do other things besides be on their screens, most of them during high school. But these middle school children, it is a way they collaborate. They don't have to look at each other in the eye. And they can be talking about the same thing and focusing. I think we shouldn't make those blanket statements about the use of technology. We need to be really much more intentional about what it is doing for our kids. And yes, the world is at their fingertips. Sometimes even some of our kids are even more advanced than others in the class, and they're all bright. And so if the teacher is teaching something and the child wants to go deeper right then and there, they can get on that iPad and find a more sophisticated piece of information to bring into the topic later. I mean, it's a discussion that needs to be looked at much, much more carefully. If they're wasting their time playing a game that they think it's too much, but maybe they need it to refocus. So we need to look at the role that technology is playing at any given moment, not just how many hours are they on screen.
I want to add about that for Minecraft. Most of my kids are Minecraft crazy. And I will tell you, it gives them a way to interact at a deep social levels that many of them have not had before. Like I say, many of my kids have been bullied. They've been excluded. They have not had the opportunity to develop those social skills. they haven't had the time or the practice in how to work through problems when they're interacting with their peers. And so for my kids, Minecraft gives them a venue to do that. And they do have to work through some pretty serious social problems with each other when they're on Minecraft in ways that they might not encounter in real life. So, you know, do we want our kids to interact socially face to face? Do we want them to be out in nature? Do we want them to get exercise? Sure. But if Minecraft gives them a venue to develop social skills that nothing else does, I think it's critical. I mean, if our kids don't develop social skills by the time they're adults, how are they ever going to be successful in the adult world?
Actually, that's exactly where I want to go next, Melanie, something that you just brought up. I want to talk about the future for twice exceptional kids and perhaps some of the challenges that they do face as adults, and perhaps some of the preparations that this sort of education that both you, Melanie, and Susan are providing for twice exceptional kids. So, Melanie, why don't you take the floor?
Well, I know for many adults, when I've been working with my population, both as a consultant and in my research, many adults will tell you that because of the upbringing they had and the education they had, they feel that they're underachievers, that they've never been able to reach their full potential. Some of them are trying now, many of them maybe midlife are starting to reconnect with their passions, trying to find a new way to engage with what they love doing. But many of them are so shut down by being forced to do it the standardized way that they never did reconnect to what it is that they're very passionate about. Or they're connected to it, but they can't figure out a way to make it happen in their adult life. And that, to me, is the biggest tragedy. I think how many people are out there that have these incredible contributions in the arts and the sciences and technology and socially and in dance and music. I mean, all these things that could enrich our society and help us grow to the kind of society we want to be. And it's not happening because the people have been through the system that's completely dissected that out of them. So my feeling is we as educators of 2E kids, that has to be our first priority. I mean, I tell the families in my school that I'm looking to teach their kids how to formulate an argument. I want them to know how to research and how to defend an argument. I want them to be able to communicate in writing and orally so they can get their ideas across. I want them to stay connected to their creativity, and I want them to be able to socially be successful. If I can do those things, I don't think any of the traditional curriculum matters at all.
You know what? This is so vitally important. And this is, one of my websites, I have been talking for many years about the changes of society that we are going through. And as an awakening society, to starting to realize that what maybe in our parents' and grandparents' day was considered to be forward and progressive thinking has actually crippled entire generations. And that it comes into that whole thing of like, you know, big boys don't cry. And, you know, you got to go to school and you got to get a job and you got to work 9 to 5 and you got to bring home a paycheck and you got to get a house and have 2.5 children and white picket fence. And people, entire generations have been crippled by this. We have in generations of miserable freaking people who are stuck as bankers and insurance agents when what they want to do is play the saxophone or paint landscapes. And we have an opportunity now as a truly awakening generation of being able to look back and see the flaws, but also to be able to look forward with this generation now that we are influencing and give them the opportunity to say, you can be whoever you want to be. Just don't say the president. Please don't say that. But you can be whoever you want to be, and you can do it. And not only that, I'm going to support you. And in my personal opinion, and again, I am kind of out there in personal opinions, education is not where it is, i.e. higher education. We have entire hundreds, if not millions, of educated people working in McDonald's and Walmart right now because they can't get a job. So they've learned that this degree that they just got in English literature actually means jack crap. I don't know how you feel about swearing, Lainey. I'm trying to control myself. So we have an opportunity now to say to kids, my kids, I don't care if they go to university, because I know that my 12-year-old daughter, who's convinced that she wants to be a marine biologist and is already seriously halfway there, that she is going to, any job that she wants to go do, she's going to take that knowledge too. And if she goes to an employer who cannot recognize the passion and the skills and the knowledge, then they're not working for her anyway. But I'm going to encourage her. It doesn't matter that perhaps marine biology isn't going to be the most lucrative profession in the world. It's her passion right now. And if it changes next year to something else, then we allow their passions to take them where they want to go. Right now, my 7-year-old, my little dude, he wants to be a Jedi Knight. Okay, awesome. Let's get out the stick fight, and we'll go stick fight, and we'll talk about geometry, and we'll talk about this spatial awareness, and I'm sure that next week he'll want to be a dinosaur trainer, and that's all good too. It's the encouraging of the children. And we have the opportunity now as the awakening parents and the awakening educators and doctors and teachers to actually make a change with these kids so that it's not perpetuated in the next generation. I was a 2E kid. I was a kid who was like so much homework piled on me because, as you've probably noticed sitting here watching me, I can't sit still. I never have been able to sit still. So my teacher's answer was, let's just give her 18 hours of homework. And if we could just keep her busy, maybe she'll sit still. And I don't want to perpetuate that. And that's where we need to move forward, in my opinion, is ensuring that those mistakes of the past are going to be fixed and remedied, and we're going to move forward.
I think Dani brings up a really important point. I think that part of the problem is even higher education is still standardized and linear sequential. And for 2E kids, I say, you know, there's a linear sequential model. And then for 2E kids, it's the hurricane model, because they want all this information swirling around them. And then they're going to reach out and pluck out the things that are interesting to them. And they're going to put them together in a unique way and do something with it that's unique. So if we're still educating in a system that's 100 years old, that was for 100 years ago for the Industrial Revolution, we're never going to be able to let these kids tap into what they can do and what they know for the future. We have no idea what the future's jobs or necessities or life skills or anything that they're going to need. All we can do is try to give them skills to meet that when it comes to them. And so if we're trying to say, you know, you need, she's saying her daughter loves marine biology, and we're saying you need a degree in marine biology if you're going to be a marine biologist, maybe her daughter's going to become an entrepreneur that'll invent a whole new way to look at marine biology. So every time you lock into this standardized way, you shut down the potential to come up with unique ideas that is the genius of our children. So my feeling is we really, as educators, as parents, as therapists, as advocates, as a 2E community as a whole, we have to really make a space for these kids to explore the future without any of our old standardized methods shutting them down.
Yes. And someone earlier said, you know, it's amazing what we'll see from these kids when we put them in the right environment. And I think the same thing goes for our twice exceptional adults. When they find their niche, when they find what's right for them, we see amazing things. Several years ago, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal about a gentleman who is dyslexic, and he was a part of the family business and had some ideas about how to change the factory to make it work more efficiently. And he was trying to explain these changes to his brothers, who are the other managers of this family business, and he couldn't get his point across to them. So frustrated, he went home, pulled out his Legos, and built the factory floor out of his Legos in order to bring it to them and say, this is what I want to do. And at that point, they said, oh, well, that makes a lot of sense. and it worked out really, really well. So when you put them in the environment where they can use their strengths and figure out ways to get around those weaknesses, it's an amazing, amazing marriage at that point. So hopefully we can continue to find these opportunities to educate our kids, to put them in those situations where they can learn, where they can begin to show their strengths, to develop their talents in whatever areas they may be, whether that's in a a homeschool situation, a specialized school, even hopefully because most of the children in the States here particularly are schooled in public or private schools. Hopefully we can start to find ways that these kids can demonstrate those skills and their strengths. Melanie?
Yeah, I agree. I think that for one, the creativity piece, our kids are divergent thinkers. They are not going to do things standardized. And so I think the more that we support them in that, the more successful they're going to be. I also think another critical point for our kids is a lot of times people will say, oh, these kids have incredible potential. And I think because they're already such perfectionists and they already are very aware of problems in our world at an adult level, but they haven't got the life experience to deal with it. When we say that kind of stuff to them, they feel like they've got to this incredible pressure to be something great. And so I think it's really important that we make sure our kids know that whatever they decide to do is great, that they're going to put their unique spin on it, that we're not asking everybody to be superheroes. They might turn out to do something that saves the planet, but that should not be the presupposed notion that, hey, you're a 2E kid, you're going to be the next, Elon Musk. That's not what we want to put on our kids. We want to give them the freedom and the space to develop who they are, because once they have that, that's where the true potential comes out and they're able to shine and do the thing that they were meant to do in this world.
I have to say that I've learned so much from this panel, but I think this panel models perfectly how we should reorganize the education system. It should be to serve this population, because in essence, everybody could benefit from what, the individualized sort of learning. I mean, this has been an incredible panel in that sense, because it really affirms what the highest, the gifted learners need, as well as those that are challenged with other issues. So, Melanie, I know you've got something else to add, please.
I just wanted to say that I think that it's a technological advance that's happening in our society anyway. I don't think we're going to be able to stop it. But I do think if we teach our kids how to utilize that they will be able to create the kind of world they want. I mean, our kids are very socially aware. They have a social justice piece, a fairness piece. They're really concerned about the state of the planet. And so I think we need to give them the tools to do what it is they need to do. And I think as parents and educators, we're the very first to model for them exactly what you're talking about, that we have that space for them. We're going to show them that we support what it is that they want to do with the planet, because the generation before them haven't done such a great job. And so maybe by de-standardizing things and giving them the freedom to explore however it is they want to approach this, then they're going to be the people who make the difference.
Yeah, I want to shift gears a little bit, and I want to actually ask a somewhat of a controversial question based on a controversial topic. Because 2E kids do have special needs, some of them are behavioral and some of them are psychological, what role does medication and over-medicating play in the educating of 2E kids? Does anybody want to take that?
I'll chime in here.
Okay.
Medication is certainly something that is used quite frequently and sometimes too frequently, and it sometimes comes in as the first line of intervention rather than somewhere down the line. As a psychologist, not a psychiatrist, as the old saying goes, I can't even prescribe an aspirin, so I don't pretend to prescribe medication or anything like that. But for many of the kids that I work with severe attention problems, with severe OCD. Sometimes medication isn't necessary, but many times I try to work therapeutically first to manage depression, to manage the areas and challenges, and sometimes we then add medication as a piece to that. I think it does have its place, but I do think that it is sometimes too quickly used in order to get a child to comply to the demands of the educational setting. Sometimes, the type of child, particularly again in a public school setting, the type of children that are in the classroom, the range varies so widely that what is now acceptable in terms of behavior and performance in the classroom has really narrowed because they've got so much ground to cover so quickly. And so the child that can't sit still, or the child that even pops out of line a little bit, must have some type of disorder that needs to be managed so that the classroom structure can be maintained, so that most supposedly can be educated in a better way. And so unfortunately it becomes very, very quick to that point. And that's the crux of the book that we wrote about misdiagnosis, is that, some of these behaviors that we're seeing in school can be better explained by giftedness, twice exceptionality, or some other mismatch in educational needs. Something like that can explain how these challenges are, or why these challenges are occurring. And if we address the giftedness, we address the twice exceptionality or the mismatch in educational setting, then we see a much better result. And if we can do those things before we go to medication, that's certainly preferable in my opinion. So I think some other folks wanted to add as well.
Yeah, I think anytime you use medication for control and compliance, it's a red flag. But I also think it's really important to remember that a lot of times the medication helps the kids themselves feel more successful, because if they're jumping out of their skin and they can't relate to anything or anybody because of the turmoil that's going on inside, and the appropriate medication helps them to be able to settle down and focus and be the kind of person they want to be, have the kind of interactions they want to have, then that's what the medication is for. And, it might be that they don't need it for life. We have to remember these kids, their asynchronous development, a lot of them have very immature limbic system, and it takes a while for that to catch up. And so maybe they needed to be medicated for a while in their lifetime, and maybe by teenage years or their 20s, they won't need it anymore. But if it is a tool that helps them grow and develop and feel successful, then I'm all for it.
I do think for some kids, medication is absolutely essential. And we have kids who decide that it's doing them harm, and they really can do better without it. But another problem I find is when kids are on medication and it's not working quite well enough, or they're having some sort of side effect, another medication is tried. And then another medication is tried. And before you know it, they have quite the cocktail. And I think we make we shouldn't keep adding medications if there's probably a more appropriate medication or a more appropriate dosage of that medication, that sometimes for some of our children, we just need to take them off everything and then start over again. And I think if we're not careful about how we are, that's not the only solution. And I think Ed made a really good point. It seems to be that we in education can't think of ways to change the environment that might be also helpful. We think about the internal environment and the external. And we need to work together, but doctors can only tell you about the internal. It's interesting. The pediatrician never says, what is that classroom teacher like? And tell me how long you have to sit, when all brain research is saying it's developmental. And if you're 6 years old, that's the longest you can pay attention. So why do kids have to sit for 20 minutes on the rug? And so if the people who are prescribing the medications don't really, have to really understand or make a comment. I don't think that demand is appropriate for children this age. And I think we need to work together. We need to all be at that table about when can we as educators, or we as parents, or we in the medical profession, how can we help each other understand the role of medication and listen carefully to what each of the stakeholders are saying, and even the kids. They're one of the stakeholders too.
Well, one of the many topics that I tackle quite often is dealing with big pharma and dealing with the lack of proper testing and dealing with the aspects of drugs are tested independently, not together. So it's fine that this drug says this is what it's been tested and this is what it shows and this one says this, but when you add them together, you end up with a cocktail, and it can be extremely volatile. And I've watched not just children, I've watched adults spin out of control as doctors are giving them all these different drugs to manage their ADD, their dyslexia, and their depression, and etc. But we're not going to go down that hole because I need another 2-hour show for that one. But environmental, and this was so, when Edward said this, it's so important. For me, I always look to the environmental first, i.e., the food going into the child's body. What kind of food? What is in the food? I learned very quickly when my 12-year-old daughter was a year and a half old that if she has tartrazine, she shakes uncontrollably for 3 hours. One cheesy, and she did this in bed for 3 hours. And my youngest son, who's 5, exact same thing. My 7-year-old, he loves hot cocoa, and the days that we're going to give it to him, we make sure it's a day where we're not going anywhere. Because I know that if he has a cup of hot cocoa, he is going to run circles around the yard until there's no grass left. These are all things that people don't necessarily take into, it's not really pointed out enough. And this is the other problem, is doctors deal with the symptoms, not the cause. So the drugs 90% of the time are dealing with a symptom. It doesn't actually look at what the cause is. And I can't tell you how many children I've dealt with who've been extremely hyperactive children. And then when you question the parents, you find out, oh, well, I put a bag of cheesies in his lunch every day. Oh, great. He had Kraft macaroni and cheese, which is 100% tartrazine, for dinner last night, and you gave him cheesies today, and then he's going to have that horrible stuff on top of a donut for his snack. All of them contain tartrazine, and you wonder why the child is burning holes in the carpet in his kindergarten class. It's because he's on a narcotic. It's a known neurotoxin that actually causes unbelievable reactions within the brain. How come? And then the child gets punished because he's hyper. And then he gets given a drug because he's hyper. And yet it was a symptom. It wasn't the cause. And that's when we talk about environmental, it is so important to look at everything in the environment. Dryer sheets. People don't realize even the chemicals that are in dryer sheets cause a lot of children to completely flip their lid. Who'd have thunk, right? You don't think about these things. But if you don't even know what to research as a parent, how do you get the knowledge you need to even look at the environment? And again, it comes back to educating and everyone working together as a community to share the knowledge that they have, because it's the only way we can move forward to support each other.
You know, Dani brings up a good point. Our kids are often highly sensitive to environmental factors, but I think also she brings up the point that it's really important that we educate the psychiatrists and psychologists and doctors, because I've seen some pretty severe misdiagnosis. I've seen kids being treated for things that they don't in fact have. And I think this is why it's so important. You find, if you're medicating your child, find a really good psychiatrist who understands 2E children, because otherwise they're going to medicate him for things that they don't actually have. And they're going to medicate him in ways that are not won't work too well for that kid. And so then you end up with the drug cocktail and the kid's not doing well, and the therapist or the psychiatrist doesn't understand that we're looking at a different paradigm. We're not necessarily trying to get our kids to fit into the school. We're trying to help them function as adults and feel successful about themselves. So I just can't stress how much it's critical to find medical and therapeutic professionals who really understand twice exceptional children.
An organization that I'm involved with called SENG, S-E-N-G, Supporting Emotional Needs of the Gifted, is one of those organizations that's out there trying to do just that. They provide continuing education courses for psychologists to help educate them about the needs of gifted and talented students, about the needs of twice exceptional students, about the misdiagnoses. They have both live continuing education as well as some home study continuing education that really allows these professionals who want to learn about the special needs to learn about them. I think that is, as panelists have said, that's essential to meeting their needs. I mean, the example I use is if you went to a doctor and the doctor had never heard of cancer, a pretty bad doctor, but if they'd never heard of cancer and you presented with classic cancer of some sort, they would try to kind of fit it into what they do know. Personally, I don't work a lot with substance abuse because I don't understand the inner workings of it. And if somebody came into my office presenting with a substance abuse issue, I would probably not understand it. I'd probably miss the point. I would find some way to explain it based on the knowledge base that I have. And that, of course, would lead me down a path of inappropriate treatment because I wouldn't have diagnosed the issue correctly in the beginning. And so if someone presents as a twice exceptional child at a psychologist's office and you don't know what twice exceptional kids look like, feel like, sound like, then it's going to be a very different situation, and you're going to misunderstand what that child's needs are and how to address them. And so it definitely it takes that education in any way you can find it. Dani?
You know what? This is so important, and I love that idea. Continuing education, and this is something that, again, old school reasoning is that the authority figure is not to be questioned, i.e. the principal, the doctor, etc. So the problem is in North America anyways, the doctors, especially in Canada, I know, are so overworked because there's not enough of them that they do not have time to take, and sometimes they are so I have met doctors who are so, I'm sorry, uneducated about what is going on now, studies that are happening now, that they might as well not even be practicing medicine. I've been to Canadian Parliament twice and gone toe-to-toe with the health minister twice. One was over the educating, because maternal and infant health is my specialty, breastfeeding. Doctors had no training on breastfeeding. So mothers would present with a child who was not thriving, and they'd say, okay, here's a bottle of formula, because that's how you fix it. No, the problem is that the mother's having problems breastfeeding. But these doctors, in their entire medical training, got 1 hour of breastfeeding and lactation education. And that was maybe 20 years ago. So in all of these things, we see it is vital that the information is brought forward, and that, and I hate to say it, but it's time for the parents to stand up and say, I'm not happy with this medical system, and you need to get educated because you're wrong. And I know you're wrong. And it's time that people really start forcing the issue, not just at the level of your own personal doctor or the doctors that you're dealing with, but at a governmental level, that there needs to be a follow-up in that system, that if you've got doctors that are teaching antiquated theories about, like you said, name something, cancer, and they're not following anything that's new that's being done, then their help is no help. And it actually, in many cases, and this is proven over and over again, is extremely harmful, especially in this realm that we're talking about, because these psychotropic drugs can have lifelong tendencies and problems that come from them when they're overdiagnosed or misdiagnosed.
I'd just like to add, I think that it's really important that we include the kids in the conversation. I think twice exceptional kids tend to be very intuitive about themselves, intuitive about other people. They have pretty strong BS meters, so you can't pull much over on them. So I think as parents, as educators, if we really listen to our kids, if they feel strongly about something, I really encourage you to pay attention to it and follow it through, because there might be a really valid, solid reason for their protestations.
Yeah, I'd like to shift gears just a little bit and ask another question to this panel. We've covered a whole range of things in regards to twice exceptional kids in this panel, but I'd like to bring the conversation back to education and learning. I come from the background of home education, and I'm most familiar with the models and concepts behind unschooling, self-directed learning, and child-led education. Do any of these modalities work? Will a 2E child thrive within those modalities, self-directed learning, unschooling, and so forth? Melanie, I know you have something to add.
Yeah, I have a lot to add. I actually think the unschooling model is pretty perfect for 2E kids because they're such autodidactic learners, and you can't really schedule out their curriculum because they can burn through a curriculum in a month or 2 weeks, or sometimes they like to really impact the curriculum and get through it really quick. Other times they want to spend a whole year on a topic. So I think the unschooling model really supports that. The problem is, like we were saying earlier, if you have working parents who need some place to put their child that will allow their kid to learn the way they want to learn, then homeschooling in any of its forms isn't going to work for them. And so I think that's a big problem for a lot of our families, especially families from lower income situations. How do they, if you're a single mom or both parents have to work 2 jobs, how do you educate your 2E child in the way that they need to? And that's where the public schools have fallen down incredibly for these families. I mean, all these families are paying the taxes to pay for the schools, yet that doesn't provide anything that their children need. So I think there are little inroads. I see people who are making schools that have little micro schools within the school that might be more suited to 2E kids in the public school, but it's very slow to come. And I think Susan tapped on this earlier where she said that parents have to be the advocates. We really have to rise up and say, we're not going to take this anymore. Our kids deserve a fair and appropriate education. We shouldn't have to pay extra to be in a private school or give up our careers because we have to homeschool, which I hate to say, most of the time it's the moms who are staying home. So they're giving up something that's satisfying for them to be home raising and unschooling their children. So I really think that we as a society have to say our public schools have to do a better job of meeting the needs for all of these kids, because I can tell you kids of color, kids from low income, girls, they're the ones that are being overlooked at the highest rates, and their potential is just being wasted too, because there's nothing for them and they don't have a way to get educated in the way that suits them best. So I think that we really have to do a better job at that.
I could also go on forever on this topic, but I think I don't 100% agree that they're all self-directed learners. We have children who can't do anything unless there's an adult right next to them. They do need some sort of support. A curriculum is fine for them to follow as long as it's the right curriculum, a contextual curriculum. We do a very highly enriched curriculum and embed any skills they need within that curriculum. I think there are public schools that have met the needs of these kids. Prince George's County in Maryland has done it for 25 years. Maryland is a good state for these kids for some reason. They do have good public school programs, very good support, and around New York City had some public school programs until very recently that were highly successful. And so I do think the standards movement is awful for these kids. I particularly worry that we're asking kids to read and write way too young, that they want them to write at 3, 4, 5 years old when our kids are going to feel inferior. Let's face it, if you don't read or write, you go into a public school, you think you are a complete failure in life. And when everything is a secret language arts lesson in the public schools, we are destroying these kids who can do an awful lot if we would just put reading and writing on hold for a while. And so I wish there were more choices for parents within the public school system where, and where we don't have to all learn our math facts in first grade. So the way school is now, I think it's highly problematic unless there is a lot of awareness. And some of us in education think RTI can help. I haven't seen it helping. I mean, personally, but I have colleagues who swear by it because it is supposed to help. But I think there's some more legal things now that I know, understand I'm in a private school and I'm talking to you about public schools. But I do know that we have some support, legal support from Office of Civil Rights that has come out with a policy that if you have a twice exceptional child or a very gifted child with a learning disability, they can be in advanced classes and get their supports because the public schools were not allowing that. We also a letter just came out by the Office of Education talking about RTI, that just because your child is doing average work in the classroom does not mean they don't need supports. So I think we are moving slowly, and if parents were more insistent, maybe we can move a little faster. But, I do think things can be done that are more structured in school that is not going to destroy these kids if it's the right structure.
I have to disagree a little bit. I mean, I agree with what Susan's saying about the response to intervention not working. It's for those of you that don't know what it is, it's when kids fail out, you try something and then you check and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, you try something else and so on. The problem I have is that this is still all based on adult agendas. And I think I have yet to see a child who doesn't want to learn when given the freedom to learn what they're interested in. I think all children are autodidacts. If you watch young children, preschool age, they're going to gravitate towards learning. They're desperate to learn how to be in the grown-up world. And even as they get into elementary school, I see my students, the majority of the students I have are between 3rd and 5th grade right now. They're really super curious about how to function in the adult life. But they do sometimes shut down because they've never been given an avenue to explore that allows them to tie into what they can and can't do. But I think the biggest problem we have as adults is we think we know what's best. And we don't. These kids have an eye to the future that we will never understand because we're not going to be in the same future they're at. That's not to say that we don't have the skills and the life experience to guide them, to facilitate, to mentor them. We do have all that. But when we start to say, I know what's best for you, I want to teach you this because I can see that this is how you're going to function in the adult world, then we are going to turn kids off and we are going to shut them down so that they're not going to be in touch with what their own learning is. And I think it's a delicate balance between the two. I think we as adults have to mentor children and show them the pathways to get to what they want, not what we want.
And I think, excuse me, I think that we have to keep in mind that, when we look at educating these kids, finding their strengths and using their strengths, developing their strengths and talents, and finding ways to compensate or remediate any weaknesses, generally works if we identify the strengths, if we compensate for the weaknesses, if we can figure out a way to do that in whatever context it is, that's great. What we have to keep in mind, though, is, and I think the panel is saying this, is that what we do for most kids, and that approach would work for most kids, but what we do for most kids doesn't work well for twice exceptional kids. What we do for most kids doesn't individualize those strengths and talents in ways that we can. And of course, we have to make sure that whenever we're educating these kids, that, you know, if there's a weak area, that we find a way to help them develop that skill in some way to allow them to function effectively, and not necessarily, you know, avoid a skill that they don't particularly like. We still have to, I think, in my opinion, figure out a way to help them learn to, you know, write. Even if they don't like to write, they got to figure out some way to communicate. Maybe it's not writing, maybe it's typing, maybe it's talking, whatever it happens to be. We got to figure out a way to get around that, not necessarily avoid those things, but finding that balance, as Melanie said, is I think, in my opinion, the most important way. Where are the strengths? Where are the weaknesses? What do we need to get around? What do we need to develop? And where are these kids' passions? What are they good at? So I think I could say a lot more as everybody else, but I'm going to go ahead and stop right there.
You know, it's funny because when we ended up moving to Morocco, it was kind of a sudden move for us. And we were looking at that point, just before we left Canada, we were looking for an answer as a parent to one of the big questions is, of course, how do you homeschool and still afford to put food on the table when you only have a single paycheck coming in? And I was opening up the conversation just before I left to, well, what are our alternatives? How do we move forward? How do we, you know, if you can't obviously afford a private school, I don't know what it's like in the States. In Canada, any decent private school is far out of reach of even the average working family, let alone lower income families. How do we move ahead? How do we help with this? And one of the ideas that we were playing with was the idea of parents finding each other, creating a space where the parents could find each other and working out something where you maybe perhaps if you got 5 families who have children all in the similar age groups with, you know, even if it's children like this, and then you said, okay, tell you what, here's what we're going to do. We'll have it set in one house, and in one day it'll be this person, and the next day it'll be that person, and the next day it'll be that person. And basically, so those parents, they could work the 4 days a week and then have the one day where they could take their turn and being with the children and directing the education. And there was a group of us actually said, you know, we honestly think that this could work. If you have parents who are willing and who are on the same page, and it goes into that support structure, right? Because not only is it support for the children, so like Melanie was talking about the socialization of children being so vitally important, that's one of the things that sometimes homeschool children lack, is they don't get the social interaction face-to-face, so to speak. But it's also the support for the family, right? It's the support for the mom or the dad who's also teaching the kids with the other parents and being able to sit and work through issues and talk about everything and having a place to go that's supportive, where you know that the people you're going to talk to are actually in the same place you are. And you know that they know. And when you say, oh, I understand, you actually know they understand. And it comes back to that main question of supporting families.
I just like to add too, I think the parents are such an important component, but I don't want to devalue the contributions of people like Susan and Ed, because it's their years of work and research and study that have contributed the knowledge base that we parents can draw from. You know, and I'm trying to add to that research stream myself now and fill in some gaps that may be there. But I just want to commend Ed and Susan for your many, many years of work and advocacy for Tule kids.
I'll certainly appreciate that very much. We do work quite a bit with these kids and appreciate hearing that. Thank you.
Well, without the professionals, where do the parents go to get the information they need? Right? I mean, this is it. And you guys are the way showers. You guys are the guys out there beating the path down and helping the ones like myself who are perhaps in a foreign land, right, Lainie? And you got to have somewhere. Thank goodness for the internet. we have the internet, therefore we can all be connected.
Yes. And thank you for those comments. I just, I'm in a private school environment and I love it. And I think I wish every child could have it. But Melanie, what you said before, they can't. So I can't believe that we can't help these kids somehow by changing some of the practice in public schools. And if I can't believe that, then for those kids who aren't comfortable in homeschools or a school like Bridges, then, I don't know what my work was for. So, it's frustrating because I think we could do it better, but I know that there are things we can do in the public sector that can help some of these kids. So we keep trying.
We can do better, and we can do better, and we must do better for these kids.
Well, one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to put together this panel once again, and I'll bring in more experts and more parents. And I want you guys to continue this conversation because it's an important conversation. You've all educated me in such a way that I didn't expect. So I'm grateful for all of you. Thank you for your incredible work and sharing your passion for these TUI kids. And I'm really, really grateful. So we ran a little bit over tonight. We started a little bit late. I want to go around to each of our panelists quickly and give you the floor for any final remarks. Perhaps you want to talk about advocacy for these children and families. Seems to be very well needed. And also, please do share with us your projects, books, websites, anything that you'd like to get out there. And like I said in the beginning of the show, your bios and links are on the show notes page on the Conscious Consumer Network show notes page for episode number 18. So I'd like to turn over the floor first to Ed. Why don't we go to you?
Great, thank you. Right now we are just beginning looking at the revision of our book, Misdiagnosis of Gifted and Talented Children, Misdiagnosis and Dual Diagnosis, which is, of course, twice exceptionality, looking at those ways that psychology is impacted by the changes in the DSM-5, for example, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, and how that's going to affect the issues with diagnosing and misdiagnosing our gifted kids. So we're just now starting the process of looking at that and trying to revise and update our book on misdiagnosis. Also involved in a project right now specifically regarding twice exceptional, and the Gifted Child Today has a special issue coming up related to twice exceptionality, and they're looking at the new definition the Twice Exceptional Community of Practice has brought forth about twice exceptionality and what that looks like from different perspectives, like psychologists, educators, parents, and a variety of other views. So those are the two main things I've got working right now, in addition to seeing 20 to 30 gifted and/or twice exceptional kids every week, trying to help them either find their educational setting or find themselves and their identity, and not allow it to be determined by their giftedness or any other specific issue that they're having. But I appreciate the opportunity to be on this panel, so thank you very, very, very much.
And Dani, why don't you pop in next?
Well, as Lainie knows, I'm always working in the broadcast industry and here on CCN and several other websites that I have, getting the news out. My prime focus these days is kind of drifted away from the areas of education and health as I'm very highly focused on government and financial fraud and pointing fingers and telling dirty secrets. So if you're interested in what's going on right now and what bank is stealing from whom, you can go to my website, Removing the Shackles. I also do a news show twice a week on CCN called Transficuous News, where again, I kind of go through the mainstream media and then take apart the news stories and tell you what they're actually saying. I will say I'm very, very proud mom, because you got to live vicariously through your children sometimes. My kids are also starting a show on CCN, and it's called the Kids Nature Network, and we just filmed their opening sequence, and Unfortunately, they filmed their first episode, and then we had an internet crash and lost the whole thing. So we have to refilm again, and we'll do that probably this week. Don't worry, Biggie, we're getting there. And it's their open invitation. That was their creation, that they came together and decided we want to do a nature show. And we want to do it right here where we are and wherever we are, just looking at what's around us and then bringing it forward, and then encouraging kids from all over the world to write in and film their own little nature adventure. So they've got a little girlfriend who's in Australia who's got kookaburras living in her backyard that my kids are all like, oh, kookaburras and kangaroos. And she's like, yeah, they're just there, whatever. But it's special to the kids who aren't there. So, yeah, I'll be talking more about that very, very soon. And the next new project that we're doing, I was supposed to wait. I'm sorry, Becky. We are doing an online conference that's going to start running once a month. Each month we'll be dealing with a different topic. On our opening one, which will be June 27th, is dealing with the origins and looking at the ancient history of the various native peoples and the Aboriginal peoples all over the world, because the only way we can kind of figure out where we came from is to look at the whole picture. So join us for that here on CCN. Lots of stuff to watch.
Thanks, Dani. Thanks for sharing all those projects. I'll be sure to watch all of them. I'm so excited for you. Let's jump on over to Melanie next, and any closing remarks and advice or anything along the lines of advocacy, anything that a parent might need to know about TUI children, and also share with us your projects.
Sure. Thanks for letting me be on this panel. I think this is the start of disseminating the information to everybody. My main focus is the kids, both my students and my own children, and I always want to look to what they need and how best to help them first. And then when I take the summers off, my school closes for 2 months, so I'm going to be finishing my book, which is a book on parenting TUI kids with some pretty compelling stories. I think it might help parents to read how much other parents of TUI kids struggle and what they've been through. And I hope it'll be a very compelling read. And I'm also trying to grow my school in a slow and careful manner. I plan long-term to open Big Minds campuses all around the Bay Area so that we can have more schools open to serve the needs of the kids. You can go look up my school. It's www.bigmindsunschool.org if you want to see what we're doing. And that also links to my blog and some other things. So, but mainly, I guess my advice to parents is find a support group, find other TUI parents, band together, support each other, because most of my findings from my research is the best thing parents can do for themselves and their kids is to have a support network.
Thank you so much, Melanie. Great advice. And finally, let's jump over to Susan. Susan, please go ahead and share with us any final closing thoughts. The floor is yours, and share with us your projects as well as school information.
Well, first of all, the most exciting thing tonight was the interest in TUI. When I first started this so many years ago, you know, no one else knew what we were talking about. And it's an extraordinary feelings of that we are really making a difference in reaching these wonderful, wonderful children that are so misunderstood. As I said, I am the director of a center we have at Bridges that is for research and professional development. We are the ones who developed that film that you didn't show tonight. The TUI Twice Exceptional, but that's a full-length film. And with it, we've developed a viewer's guide that's quite available, and you can use it to run groups of people. They can watch this movie. It was done by one of our Board of Trustees, who is a filmmaker, Tom Roboleski. We're just at 2 screenings yesterday, and it's getting people to pay attention to who these children are. And so we're really excited. We developed a viewing guide to go with it, and you can find, if you just type in Chewy Twice Exceptional, you will get to Tom's website, and how, if you want to purchase the film, it's through him. But we are now developing more modules that to go with that film. So to help people, we mentioned strength-based education. Well, what does that really look like? What does talent development really, really look like? And so from those clips, we'll be developing more materials. I am so excited. I will never retire because there's so much more to be done. So thank all of you for sharing your ideas, and I feel enriched by all of your comments. Thank you.
Well, I have a surprise for you all. Susan, we're gonna end the show now, but we're going to show that preview of your film. I didn't know that was yours when I did my
I thought maybe I shouldn't tell you.
It was such a beautiful example because it was from the, you'll see in just a moment, it's from the voices, from the mouths of the students. And I was so touched when I found that little video clip. Thank you all, everybody. Thank you so much for being on this panel tonight. Thank you for joining us for the Love of Learning, Voices of the Alternative Education Movement. I am so grateful to have had each one of you here tonight and sharing your passion. And I would love to talk about Chewy children again. So perhaps in the future, we'll put together another panel and talk about this again, because I do think it's really, really important. And I think the most important thing, and I've said this earlier, I'm learning from you guys because what your study and focus is about, it's showing us how education should serve the individual. You're serving a fiercely independent population, and they have very special needs. I think if all education served and honored the fierce independence of everybody, we would get away from standardizing, which really doesn't work. So thank you. Wherever you are, whatever you do, continue to do it always for the love of learning. And we're going to go to the video now.
I always thought twice exceptional, in my mind at least, meant one of those genius computer hackers like Bill Gates, who was able to start companies or hack into the Pentagon or just do something really cool, but was just sort of, when stuck into a social situation, didn't know what to do. To me, twice exceptional has always meant somebody really smart who's just not very good at parties.
Well, I've been trying to figure that out for about 6 years. I've been classified that as I go into school, but it's like kids who are gifted, but they also have a learning disability, like ADD, ADHD, for OCD, for example.
You know, it's interesting. It has evolved for me because originally the label seemed to be gifted and learning disabled, and it was really isolated to just children with learning disabilities. Coming from a clinical psychology background, I was seeing all of these kids who were quite intellectually gifted, but then had depression, had attentional issues, ADHD, Asperger's disorder. And to me, that was the bulk of what twice exceptional was, but it wasn't being called that yet in the literature. And so for me, it has evolved from this concept of just learning disabilities to kids with any other difficulty, challenge, exception, plus being really intellectually gifted.
I feel that term, twice exceptional, means a student who is exceptional, but who has talents, who has abilities, who has something that they're very, very good at and very driven to do, but who also has a lot of challenges along the way in order to reach that goal. So as much as they would like to be doing something and they're really good at it and they have the potential to do something, there are certain roadblocks along the way that really get in the way, and it's our job to help them learn how to deal with that.
Twice exceptional is different for each person, but I'd say to try and define the general, twice exceptional kid would be someone extremely creative with with a lot of drive to do whatever they set their mind to.
I do everything 110%. I know exactly what I want to do and how I want to do it, and not doing it is not an option. Go home and I play at least 5.5 hours of music, at least, and I stay up until 2 a.m. driving my parents nuts. But it's worth it. They'll thank me later. So I do that every day, and every morning I wake up in the morning. I know this is what I need to do to make my life where I want to go. 5 hours of practice, bleeding fingers, whatever I have to do, I'm going to do it. I do it every day.
Because I live in the world of artists, how many of the artists in my own vintage might have been diagnosed as twice exceptional back in the day if they had had that diagnosis around? Probably a lot of them.
Albert Einstein would have definitely been a Bridges kid because there are actually records of him having such a different way of thinking and looking at things that he would have trouble with his teachers, and he would constantly challenge his teachers in the way his teachers were teaching the class. A lot of the teachers here are not, I wouldn't say social differences, but they are like us. They're like the Bridges students, so they get it.
You know, when I was their age, I definitely was, one thing that really correlates well was, even though it's a different time for technology, I was all about computers. When I was like 11 years old, I saved up all my money from a paper route and bought my first computer. And all these kids love the technology, even, you know, and today it sort of really permeates our whole lives, where it was sort of a niche thing to do, a geeky thing to do when you were a kid. And now how things have really changed for me is, like, I was a computer geek growing up through most of my life, and now being a computer geek, and there isn't even really a term, like a real term anymore, because everyone's a computer geek nowadays.
What brought me to Bridges? Basically making sure, why was I doing science? I was doing great science. I was studying spinal cord injury using a zebrafish as a model organism. But I was doing the same thing every day, and I needed something to inspire me. Why did I get into science? So a friend of mine told me about Bridges Academy. And I interviewed and I met some of the students, and it clicked that that was me. Basically, I was quirky, I have ADD, I have ADHD, I'm dyslexic, and I wish I had an opportunity when I was younger, basically have a school like Bridges. And I was always put in special ed classes, and they just thought I wasn't bright enough. And it was just because I read differently. I need to learn differently. It doesn't mean I wasn't smart. So coming to Bridges made me feel like I'm paying it forward.
A 2E student, for me, is a student who is much smarter than me. These kids are so smart.
If you really had to make a difference on a large scale with minimal resources, how would you go about it? Have you ever dared to dream of doing that which seems impossible? On a planet steeped with corruption and destruction, the question beckons, how do we change it? Media has a far-reaching impact on people and has been used to manipulate humanity into our current destructive patterns. In order to affect people into moving into constructive patterns of behavior, we need to construct a new paradigm of media. Conscious Consumer Network has been created with the explicit intention of giving the amazing truth-seeking, solutions-orientated, alternative media a place to fully realize their true potential, with a cutting-edge, high-tech professional media platform being made available to use at no cost to the broadcaster. In turn, some of the greatest freedom-seeking hearts and souls of our time have realized the true potential of what has been created and have come together to provide their insight and inspiration on CCN. Conscious Consumer Network has become a unique, interactive information and educational network which provides a free-to-view, live-stream, ultra-high-definition channel to the world and features 25 live shows a week and growing with the addition of multiple language broadcasts. CCN has features comparable with mainstream media, such as being able to pause and rewind broadcasts whilst being live-streamed. Catch up on this or previous broadcasts, now available from CCN high-definition downloads. You can now purchase a high-definition download of your favorite CCN show from ethymarket.com. Support free and independent media by becoming a monthly pledger. This can be done with a monthly pledge of €10, which will allow you unlimited access to CCN's high-definition downloads, which hosts a back catalogue of over 250 shows which have been aired since the launch of CCN on the 1st of January 2015. In order to keep CCN free of corporate sponsorship and advertising, CCN has launched the Pledge 300 campaign. This is a realistic goal with the hopes of securing a minimum of 300 people who will each pledge €10 a month. With this number, we can continue to grow and operate and potentially expand into a second foreign language channel. Without it, CCN will simply not be able to function without succumbing to corporate sponsorship and advertising. Help keep alternative media in the hands of the people. We thank you for supporting free and independent media.